Hey everybody, Mark Dawes here once again, and you may have seen a video I put out recently about how the use of restraint equipment can reduce risk in a restraint. And if you haven't seen the video, I'll leave a link below so you can go back and watch that video, because this video follows nicely on the back of that one. Because in that video, while we're discussing a particular situation someone had where they were doing a prolonged restraint, restraining a service user in prone and supine, it was going on for hours. And I mentioned to the person about considering the use of certain restraint equipment, and I mentioned about handcuffs and soft restraint belts, and I also mentioned the SafetyPod. And I'm fortunate enough today to have Pal Kesh with me. Now, he popped down to see me actually, and he didn't know this was going to happen, so I've actually hijacked him into doing this video. So it's live, and you may see some errors in it, but we're just going to do a live video because I wanted to take the opportunity to talk to Pal so he can get the information out to you about this piece of equipment he's got, which is the SafetyPod. So, Pal, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
So for people who don't know me, I'm Pal Kesh from UK Pods Limited, Senior Clinical Skills Lead and SafetyPod Lead, and I'm on the island to see Mark, and here we are, it's a pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. Well, first question then, the obvious question, is does the SafetyPod actually reduce floor restraint?
Yes, is the short answer to that. I mean, we've got evidence to show now that it absolutely does, and we've got areas to show where we've reduced restraint by 100% on the ground and eliminated the use of supine in some areas as well. And we're happy to share that evidence. People can always get in contact with us, and we'll happily cascade that down to prove it.
100%.
Yes, and we're very proud that we can do that now, and we've put a lot of work in to achieve it.
That's astonishing. I mean, when you first came to see me, and when Pal first got in touch with me, and I didn't know him, I didn't know about his kits, and he sent me an email and wanted to introduce himself, and I checked the website out, and I just thought what you had was a beanbag. And I thought, what's this beanbag thing? So I now know the difference, but could you just tell people out there what the difference is between this piece of kit that you've designed, this called SafetyPod, and a standard beanbag that someone can buy from a retailer?
Absolutely. The SafetyPods come from a team that take this very seriously, and because of that, the SafetyPods come with a lot of reassurance. So, for example, the performance testing that gets done on the SafetyPods to make sure it complies with things like your fire regulations, your infection control regulations. We get things sealed off with a medical review, so Anthony Bleakman conducts our medical review annually. We provide servicing with a SafetyPod to make sure you get your aftercare and your maintenance taken care of, which is important if it's a piece of equipment. So it's a standalone product, and one that is completely different from a standard furniture type beanbag.
Now, this is an important thing. Now, many of you may remember the Thomas Orchard case where Mr. Orchard was restrained by the police and they used emergency response belts on his body and put it around his head. Now, as part of the investigation into the death of that poor man, the health and safety executive actually went through and looked at the equipment that was used, and they looked to see whether or not it was fit for purpose. They checked the industry testing, they checked the medical reviews, they went into great detail with a fine-tooth comb here. And I'm happy to say, because my very good friend of mine was actually running the company that was supplying the kit at the time, that passed with flying colours because it was industry specific, it was tested and reviewed and had gone through the whole process. So if you use a beanbag and in a restraint, which isn't industry tested, it's not had a medical review and hasn't gone through that process, and that restraint intervention goes wrong because the equipment fails, then you have a potential liability. Whereas with something like this has got to reduce the overall liability of any organisation using it because of the process it's gone through.
Absolutely, 100%.
No, that's another question for you, which involves cost, and cost is a major factor nowadays, is if I buy this piece of kit, if I buy this SafetyPod, do I now have to get a lot of training to learn how to use it? Yeah,
and it's definitely something that organisations worry about when thinking about getting a SafetyPod. Are we going to need even more training, and are we going to have to be taught more techniques in order to use the equipment? And thankfully the answer is no. It makes life easier for everybody really, because we can just say no, you don't need any additional training. If you've got a system in place, use it. If that system is teaching people how to manually support people in a seated position or even positions on the ground, we recommend you try those same techniques on a SafetyPod, and so far we haven't had anybody come back and say it doesn't work.
So it can be used with any system of intervention?
Yeah, so far we've had many systems of training out there trial the SafetyPods alongside their techniques, and we haven't had a single one back saying it doesn't work.
Alright. Does it, and again another cost question, does it require additional staff to be involved in the restraint?
No, I think one of the things we must do is reduce the numbers of staff required to carry out physical intervention. I know with my experience, I can recall interventions taking up 5 or 6 members of staff and then you've got people who might come and take over on an incident. So if we can reduce the numbers, that'd be fantastic, and there's a lot of benefits that obviously come with having additional members of staff to hand if an incident's taking place. So in comparison to those numbers of 5 or maybe 6 initially, we see just 2 members of staff actually required to manually support somebody with a safety pod.
So it reduces staff numbers?
Yes, it reduces it.
So this could actually, outside of healthcare and care settings, this would even be ideal for foster carers and people who are looking after the children who have challenging behaviour.
It's an ideal service to look at, yeah, absolutely.
Right, brilliant. So, I mean, we've gone through, quite a lot of benefits here. It reduces floor restraint, it reduces the amount of time that people are restrained for, it's industry tested, so it reduces liability. There's no additional training required. It actually reduces the need for additional staff and restraint. Are there any other benefits that this piece of equipment gives to people?
Yeah, I mean, those are all the primary benefits, and if those aren't enough, well, are there any more benefits? And thankfully, because we've been working very closely with our clients up and down the UK over the last year, we've seen some tremendous benefits in other areas. For example, the training forum, where staff have actually voiced and said it's far easier to retain and to learn the techniques that we're going to have to need to use if we have to use the safety pod, and we can see that it's far safer as well. Debriefs that are conducted have indicated that clients, experts by experience, have voiced and said, that has felt far safer and less intrusive when I've been held on it in comparison to a ground intervention. So there's lots of other benefits, and again, if you want to get in contact with us to find out anything about those benefits, you can do that anytime.
Well, you mentioned there about it being the least intrusive option, which was my next question to you actually. Would the safety pod be the least intrusive option? Because with a lot of government guidance now, and a big drive on reducing restrictive practices and restraint reduction, this piece of kit must be the least intrusive option, as opposed to a manual restraint that goes on for a prolonged period of time.
Exactly, and it sits well with any of the proactive elements that organisations are putting in place to be less restrictive. So, for example, your safe wards and your PBS strategies, safety pods work with those to be proactive, and therefore, are far less intrusive than just focusing on supine and prone.
Now, obviously, the big question people want to know is the cost of this, but I'm more interested in the cost of not having one, because I know for a fact, and you've only got to do a Google search on this for payouts for restraint-related deaths. These are going into the hundreds of thousands of pounds now. So if someone dies in a restraint, a prolonged restraint, which is one of the factors in a restraint where people die very sadly, payouts, and we're talking about a financial fine by the courts. Basically, they're going to pay out over £100,000, but that doesn't even take into account the collateral fallout from this. The investigation costs, the suspension costs, the absenteeism costs, the trauma caused. In many cases, family breakdowns as a result of this. So, considering that the tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds of cost potential implications, what's the cost of a safety pod?
Well, in comparison to the list you've given there, because clearly it can potentially ruin lives and destroy lives, and we've seen it do it, in the past. In comparison to a price of a safety pod, which actually start at $399, it's a no-brainer and not a subject I like to hang around on. You can't put a price on safety. We always work with our customers. If they weren't happy with a safety pod, we would even look at saying, right, well, if there isn't a need for it, then absolute need, we'll take that back quite happily.
Well, they get a refund.
That's exactly, yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Jump done. So, going back to this, legally under health and safety legislation, all organisations have to, extend a duty of care to staff and others, including service users, patients, and clients. And they qualify by words called reasonably practicable. And again, in that last video, which I'll leave a link for, I gave a brief overview of what reasonably practicable means. It's basically risk versus cost. And the higher the risk, the less you can argue cost. So we've got a piece of kit here that starts for less than £400 that could potentially save you hundreds of thousands of pounds if a death was to occur. In fact, they reduce the risk of that death occurring.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Well, to me, it's a no-brainer. And that's why we as a company, promote these things and we showcase these things. I'm not on commission, by the way. I don't take commission on these things at all. I'm not raking money off the guy. I just think it's an exceptional piece of kit, and it does away with the need for restraint, which is a good thing. It reduces the need for people to need my services in many cases, and my company services, which is absolutely fine with me because it's the best thing out there. So if you're thinking about using this kit, or you'd like to find out more about this kit, then leave a comment below, or drop Parkesh a personal message, or drop him an email, or visit his website. What's your website address?
UK Pods Limited is the company. We're on www.ukpodsltd.co.uk.
Yeah, ukpodslimited.co.uk. There you go. Please, guys, like the video, share the video, spread the love, leave any comments below, we'll get back to you. Thanks so much for watching, and like I said, I'll leave details below about PAL's website. I'll leave a link to the video I did that this one followed on the back on, and if you have any questions you'd like answered, get in touch. Thanks ever so much.